Thank you, Marty. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm very excited to be here with you. And we're going to get started right away. And Marty, is my presentation up here?
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Your slides are not the same as mine. My apologies.
And how many new people do we have? First, let's see a show of hands for if you're brand new to remote viewing. Okay, so a few of you. And how about if you're familiar with remote viewing but you're brand new to Associative Remote Viewing or ARV? Okay, so maybe about a quarter of the people here are new. So I've designed this presentation to speak specifically to the new people but also to serve as reminders to the more experienced people and to also maybe kind of consolidate your way of thinking about how you approach your psychic work. So a lot of you have a lot of skills, but how can we simplify this? So even though this is called getting the most out of your remote viewing session every time, I could also call this everything you ever needed to know about remote viewing in 30 minutes or less, which really isn't so accurate. There's so much to know, but I'm going to do my best here to give you some insights because really you guys, some of you are just being thrown into this. And yesterday you heard speakers talk about, well, we're not going to tell you what approach to use. You could use whatever approach you want. And some of you, if you're brand new, you don't have approaches yet. So I'm going to try to fill in the blanks right now. And Marty gave me a nice introduction. I have a few books on the subject of psychic development, and this is what I do for my day job now. I teach 4 classes a week. A lot of my classes focus on helping people to learn how to read other people, but also I've been involved in remote viewing for over a decade now, and but the main point in bringing this up is that I work with hundreds of people, and there's not a single person who wanted to get better with their psychic skills and who stuck with it and didn't improve. Now I'm saying stuck with it because there's plenty of people that just say, oh, this isn't for me, and they walk on. They go on to other things. Now a lot of people, I would say probably 80% I work with don't have any difficulties. They see successes right away, not in every session, but a few sessions they see enough success. There's usually, say, 2 out of 10 people have a hard time and they need to keep working at it. They need to retake a class or they need to do a lot more practice or try different approaches. Sometimes one approach doesn't work for someone and they just have to try another. But I've never found a person who didn't improve if they stuck with it. And really, when I say improve, got to places with their abilities that they never, ever anticipated. And I just want to say to the new people here, if you have a session that just totally sucks, that's okay. You're going to have, we only did 2 yesterday, there's 6 more, and sometimes it takes the 4th or 5th one to see you start to get some successes. So really, I want you to think about this, that using our psychic abilities and tuning into information on this level is so easy. It's mind-blowing how easy it is. And that's what makes it hard. So in regular life, you don't know what someone looks like or feels like or smells like until it either rises above the noise level, and sorry for some of my examples here, but you're just sitting here minding your own business, and then let's say you're reading a book, you're not going to notice something else in your environment unless something grabs your attention. And then you look over at it and see, oh, what just made this noise or this obnoxious odor? So, or you turn your attention to what you want to know and observe. Or someone comes in and they tell you about whatever you might need to know about, or you ask about it and learn indirectly. So I just wanted to, if John Herlosky, he's one of our speakers, he's a longtime remote viewer. How many of you know John Herlosky? I'm doing a little exercise here. Okay, not a lot. Who can tell me what John Herlosky is wearing? Just raise your hand if you know what he's wearing today. Okay, now I'd like John to stand up and everyone look at John. And now how many people know what John is wearing? Just raise your hand if you know, if you could give me some descriptors of what he's wearing. So was that hard? No. Well, this is exactly how our psychic abilities work. All you need to do is decide you're going to go look at something, and before you didn't. So it might have seemed impossible. How the heck am I going to know what John is wearing? You looked over and you saw it. This is how easy it is to view these photos, to get information about them, the photos you're going to see later. So thank you. I'm sure John appreciates me embarrassing like that. But what would happen when, look over at John right now, and then could somebody just start to make a loud noise in the room? Just look at John, everyone look at John, and then a couple of people start to make loud noises. Okay, did anyone just look over at that person? Did you tell yourself, no, I have to look at him, but I want to look over there? Well, that happens all the time. That's where your attention goes to something else you're not really supposed to be looking at. And that's an example of what happens with remote viewing as well. So if someone saw the wrong feedback photo, they saw what was happening at the other table or something happening in the room at time of feedback, that's all that was happening there. So psychic perception mirrors regular perception. You always start with a question or goal. Whenever you want to know something, you have that question. You direct your attention to it, you observe, you comprehend, and then you either move on to something else, you abort the task, or you probe it more closely by moving towards it. In a regular environment, anytime you walk into a room and you want to understand something about the room that's in the room, you see a beautiful vase on a desk, what do? You move closer to it. You don't just stand there saying oh, I really want to be able to see this. You take some action, you move towards it, you explore it. You might pick it up, you might move behind it. These are all things you can do in your remote viewing sessions as soon as you notice something. So all psychic approaches, and this is really true whether you're using an approach to read a person, which I look at reading people as involving, there's a lot of differences between if you're going to read someone who's in front of you and they want information about their relationship or themselves, that involves a lot of symbolic, using symbols and other approaches. We're not going to get in here today. Mediumship as well, there's different approaches, but there's a lot of similarities. So what I've done over the years, I've studied just about every approach there is in remote viewing, clairvoyant training, mediumship, and bringing all of that together. And they all involve the same thing. They all involve getting initial impressions and then probing the initial impressions to get secondary impressions, and then probing the secondary impressions, and that could go on, or returning to the beginning to get brand new impressions. And most untrained people just don't know how to get the flow started. Or they'll get the impressions, but then that's it. Okay, I saw a tree, I saw a boat. That may be all you need to ever get, but there might be a lot more. Those may not be correct. They may be analytic overlay, and if you probe them further, you would find that out soon enough. So I'm going to talk here in a minute how sometimes just a very initial impression, like Joe was saying yesterday, an initial gestalt is oftentimes all you need, but it really depends on a lot of other circumstances, one being when you're viewing photos, what are the different photo options. And I just want to say here too that what I'm going to be talking about now is particularly relevant to ARV and remote viewing photos. So I'd be giving a different presentation in some ways at this point if I was talking about just remote viewing. And for the new people here, just understand that what we're doing here this week, well, of course it pertains to remote viewing. We're getting very specific about the specific associative remote viewing process with these various protocols. And if you're finding that, you're saying, I'm not so sure I like this, just know this is one subset of remote viewing of an entire field. Okay, so first step, starting the flow, getting initial impressions. Okay, we already talked about that. Intention, we need to have an intention. In ARV, we're describing the feedback photo. And I'm not going to go into this too much because it was talked about a lot yesterday, but our job is to jump over all the distractions and go right to the feedback photo. Okay, so let's focus more on approaches. So I think of it as two different toolboxes when it comes to our attention. Now, the easiest, if you have no techniques at all, you've never learned any particular methodology with using your psychic abilities, then the first approach is basically no approach. It's, I'm going to sit here and just let the impressions come. And this often works just terrific. This is, for a lot of people starting out, they'll get something almost every time. Now, the thing is, you let it come and you empty your mind. But some people don't have empty minds. It's just the opposite. So some people, if you've never meditated before, you've never done activities where you have to focus, you may have a harder time just letting it come. Because again, as I was talking about with, you're perceiving what rises above the noise level. So if you're sitting there obsessing about your next job or where you're going to live or what just happened, if your mind is full, then it's going to be harder to get those impressions. So when you read about how to develop your psychic abilities, this was my case when I was quite young. I have an identical twin sister, and we would have a lot of psychic experiences together, but I had no idea how to actually control this, or if someone said describe this photo, I would have had no idea. And whenever I read about it, all I could find was books that said you need to meditate and empty your mind. And they were correct in that respect, but what I found is that's not enough. I needed a lot more, and that's why I'm here today. So you could use symbols to focus on, and in remote viewing there's something called an ideogram. And basically, we don't have time really to go into the ideogram, and I wish I had an example here, but basically it's the idea when you write your target number, you just let your hand make a reflexive mark, and then you can probe that reflexive mark. So what you could do, since unfortunately I don't have time to go over that, what I would say is when you write your target number, what I'd suggest is write your target number and then just take your pen and trace the target number, or think of the target number as a doorway or portal to where you want to go, and you could just put your hand on that target number or trace it with your pen, and that actually becomes, it's like using psychometry, like how a psychic would hold on to someone's keys and get information about them. So and you can set this up for yourself that every time you touch the target number, your consciousness is going to go, or subconscious, whatever part of you can grab that information, it's going to go right there and then enter into your conscious mind. So that is more going to toolbox 2. I'd say that's in between passive reception and passive and just being receptive versus the tools of being active. Now, active is where you tell yourself, I'm going to go do something. So beyond that, you can go to the location. So there's any number of techniques to do this. If you want to think of it that you're flying out of your body, you're going on a magic carpet ride over to the location of where the photo was taken, which is called a photo site, you can do that. You can just imagine your body, your energy field is extending over to the location. You could even think of the location is coming to you. It's just right there. Say at the count of 3, the location is here surrounded around me, and I'm just going to look around. So then you can move around the target. Just like I said before, there's a base on the table, you move towards it and you examine it more closely. So any perception you got, you can go and examine more closely. The key here is that you don't want to form opinions about what it is. And probably, if I was going to give any advice, whatever you're thinking, you're looking at it, put it down on the paper, sketch it, but know that it may not be that thing at all. You may be getting analytic overlay, but there's a reason you got that thing. So if you're looking at something and you say this is a house, well, what did the house look like? Sketch that. You could put it down that it resembled a house, but in your mind tell yourself, it may be that, it may not be. My job is not to be naming this or figuring it out, but I have a square thing. It seems like it's a structure man-made. And now, in a minute, we'll move into how to go into the secondary probing of that. But you don't want to be doing your session saying to yourself, what is this? What is this? I want to understand this. How many of you were doing that in your work yesterday? Just raise your hand if you found yourself saying, what is this, as you were getting impressions? Probably just about everybody, because I can say don't do that. I still do it, and then I have to tell myself, no, that's not my job here. I'm just supposed to be describing and sketching and probing and moving around. So another thing you could do, I like to do this for photos because we know that someone took the photo. Someone had to have taken the photo, and that person was observing what was going on, and that person also has a camera. So I like to go stand next to the photographer. I just pretend I'm doing this. You know, I might say hi to him, I might hug him, hold his hand. I don't want to get information about him. And that's the thing, you know, again, we're all psychic here, and we could get information about people, or we could get information about anything, but the challenge here, the people who are going to do the best, who are going to make money for themselves and each other, are the ones that are describing what needs to be described and not everything else. So when I say I'm going to hold hands with a photographer, you know, hopefully he doesn't mind, but when I do that, I don't want to know what he ate for lunch or who he's married to. I want to know what he's looking at. I just know that he's there. It's something to anchor yourself to. The same thing if you don't want to be too close to a person, because some of you are used to reading people and just connecting too much to people, and your job is going to be connecting to physical structure. So you could look through the camera. You know, there's a camera there, just look right through it. And then there's also working with the paper itself. We were talking to Paul Smith yesterday, and he's a longtime military remote viewer, and he's taught ARV classes for a long time, and he tells people that only not to go to the location, but just to describe the photo. So with a photo, you're not going to get smells, you're not going to get a breeze running through your hair if it's breezy, but you'll get shapes and you'll get colors. So you can tell yourself what to do. Again, it's where you put your attention. So if you want to just probe the paper, which can be very helpful because there's no guessing then with shapes or colors, you can just simply put your hand on the paper. You could, let me see if I can get a picture here. Here's kind of a silly picture. If I was going to probe the paper, and let's say this was laying on the desk, if I put my pen on the left side of the paper, I'm going to get a taller person than if I have my pen on the paper there, I'm going to have a shorter person. Now we had, one of our groups had a photo yesterday where it actually, there was a much different thing on the left compared to the right. So whoever actually probed the paper would have gotten different shapes and different heights and different colors depending where they put their pen. So you could put your pen anywhere on the paper, and or you know, just usually it's good to start in the front. Now, or you can move your hand through the paper and your body through the paper. So I was just talking about the 2D approach on the paper. You can also now say, well, I've decided this is, you know, a little boring. I want to go to the location. I'm going to touch the paper. I'm going to move myself through the paper to the site, land at the site, and now I'm actually going to be touching this big guy there. I'm going to move myself right to him, which maybe you don't want to do that because he might be a little scary and bite your head off. But the point is you can stay with the paper, or you can go through the paper, or if things get intense or you're confused, you can come back and say, no, I'm just going to probe the paper again. So this is all primary probing just to get initial impressions. You could always return to this later. And so the second step, probing the initial impressions to get more details. Sometimes this isn't necessary in ARV. Again, that's what Joe was talking about, initial gestalt, get a couple impressions, that's all. Sometimes that's fine, but sometimes it's absolutely essential. And I could say even yesterday, I have a table with very experienced viewers. I've seen a lot of their sessions and they're fantastic. Yesterday, even for our group, we didn't always have enough data to assess it. So it wasn't that they had wrong data, there wasn't enough because there wasn't enough time to do the session. So sometimes you need the secondary probing. I was going to give you some examples of this. The internet working. This is just one recent session I did. I was actually involved in Marty will tell you about APPI. I was doing some sessions for that, and this was one of them. And in a 2-minute session, I basically got silver color fish piled up in a mound, still flopping around. So that was a pretty good match, and that resulted in a hit. But I've had plenty of other sessions where it wasn't until I stayed in the session for about 20 minutes, 25 minutes, you know, maybe on page 7 or 8 or 9, where I actually got something that matched. I was kind of all over the place, or just a lot of junk in the session. And if I had ended at 5 minutes, I wouldn't have had anything. So this is a challenge in remote viewing because there's so many different factors involved, and a lot of it has to do with the photos, a lot of it has to do with your own self, what you're dealing with. You know, we could list 20 different factors of why one day you might get information really quick, the next you won't. But also you never know how complex the photo is. Also what photo you got right before. If you just had 2 water targets in a row and now you're given another one because maybe you're working in different groups, and you'll start to see a lot of the same elements emerge. So if your mind will start getting confused, like, wait, I'm seeing water, but that happened in my 2 other targets. So what's been happening for me lately is I'm missing the water. Like my subconscious, I think, just decided, you know, you're seeing too much water, so we're going to have you focus on the other elements in the target. So that's something I'm kind of working through. And this is what happens with people who are viewing for a while. You encounter different problems, and then you have to work through them. And problems can arise because you're doing so much work, and then you have to figure out a new way of doing that. So here's an example. If all a viewer did was a circle, and these were the targets, this is a great session, right? Anyone could look at this and say, oh, I know what photo they were describing. Your judges are going to be able to make an easy decision, and that might have taken less than a second to do and maybe about 5 seconds to sketch it. But the problem is you don't know. You don't know if you're going to get something like this. Now maybe if the target pool is designed in a very simple way, that will help, but then there's downsides to only getting simple targets too. So in this case, you had the circle, but again, whoever chose these targets did not really do a great job as far as there's circular objects in there, so you're not going to be able to tell which the viewer was describing. So this just means that, you know, sometimes it's not great photo choices, but if you had done more probing, and that's what I'll talk about next, is how to probe this. Here's another example. You might have gotten triangles. At first you're like, oh, there's no triangles in there, but when you look at that circular building, it's made up of all these small triangles. But there's also the overall shape of that truck, to me, looks somewhat triangular. So I might feel like, oh, I wish the viewer had gotten more data than just putting some triangles in. Okay, so secondary probing. So let me just go back to this. What would you do in this case if you had so you're a viewer, you've drawn a circle. That's all you saw something round. You put it down. You might have even had analytic overlay, like, oh, I'm seeing a golf ball. Actually, a golf ball would be helpful for this perception, even though it's not correct. But let's say you have a circle. How do you deal with that? Secondary probing, there's 2 approaches. So again, you can work with the paper. You simply say, okay, I want more information about this. You could just put your hand on the whole thing on the paper that you just sketched. So you sketch first, and then you go in to get more information. So you put your hand on, or your pen right on the circle, and ask for more information to come. That would be just generally probing the whole thing. Or you can probe parts of it. You can put your pen up on top, say, I want to know what's at the top of that. And I want to know what is. So let's take the photo of the, what is that, whatever that vehicle is. Okay, so if you, for this, let's say you were probing those triangles. If you probe the top of the triangle, you're going to get the part of the car that has glass, a steering wheel. You might see a person up there. If you probe the bottom of the triangle, you're going to get, the very bottom, you're going to get a ground with dirt. If you probe the middle, you're going to get the red circle in between and maybe tire treads. You might start to get movement. So depending what part of your sketch you probe, you're going to get different information. And again, there's still these 2 approaches. You can say, I'm just going to work with the paper, 2D, where I'm just getting the shapes and colors on the paper. 3D, you're going to move into the actual location. And I was talking about Paul Smith, who is a long-time remote viewer, and he likes to just work with the paper, not going to the location for associative remote viewing. And the reason for that is if you go to the location, you might see more than just the parameters of the photo. So that's the thing that's important for everybody. It doesn't matter if your location is, let's say, again, we'll go to this picture. let's say it's that vehicle, that's the target, and maybe there's an entire ocean 10 feet away from that. If you describe an ocean, that is not going to be helpful. That's going to mess things up. So you always want to think of that you have to keep yourself within the frame, the parameters of the frame, and that's all you can look at. So if you're doing movement around there, if you're using the 3D approach where you're actually going to the location, then you're going to want to make sure that you tell yourself, I can't go far from what I'm supposed from. I have to stay within the parameters of the photo, even though you're at the location. It would be whatever the photographer could see with the camera. And that also, for those of you that might want to move above the target and look down, you're not going to want to necessarily move too high up. So you might start like 200 feet up above the target and look down. Now this gets tricky because, again, one of the biggest challenges of remote viewing is you could have a photo of a entire, I've had like the entire Earth. And I didn't know it was going to be the entire Earth because it could also be a picture of, a close-up of a flower. Ed May and James Spottiswoode have done studies where they talk about the bandwidth of a target pool, and they say that viewers tend to do better when the bandwidth is restricted. So what that means is all types of photos fall within some parameters, so a person would then know how to approach it. And that's what I found helpful with approaching things is, I'm going to, if I'm just doing a simple object that could be a flower or a cup on a table, my approach, or even something that doesn't exist in reality, it might be good to know that, because if something's just a Photoshop picture, then my techniques of going to the location are not going to do me any good. And sometimes we just don't know that. But that's why it's helpful to have a really big tool bag, and you try an approach, and if one approach doesn't work because of the restrictions of what you're looking at, another approach will. Okay, so, and then just remembering you could use all your senses if you do actually go to a location, but you want to just be aware, like, if sometimes a smell or a taste is great, but a lot of times if people are judging, they can't judge that either way. So sketching and shapes and colors and visual in ARV, when your ARV involves photos, which it doesn't always, but in this case we're using photos, the visual is more important. So the third approach after secondary. So I talked about the first approach is getting an initial impression. The second approach is probing that initial impression. And then the third approach is asking some questions and then probing those questions. And personally, I've had great success with this. And we just have about 2 more minutes. 5 minutes, okay. So I've had a lot of, I always do one of these at the end of every session, just about. I'll write the question and then I'll probe the question. So what have I missed that I really needed to get about my feedback photo? I write that on my paper. Again, I touch it. I run my finger over it. So I'm not, the thing that touching does is now I'm not sitting there like trying to figure anything out. I do not want to figure anything out. I just tell myself as soon as I write this sentence on the paper and I touch it with my finger or I underline it or trace it, I'm going to get more impressions. I'm at least doing something, so I'm not sitting there like, because if you tell yourself I need to just empty my mind and let it come, sometimes that brings up anxiety, or it's just your mind starts filling it up with other things. But if you do a physical action, a lot of times that gives you enough to engage with that frees it up so the information in your subconscious can come to your conscious mind. Another thing I like to say is what's most important about the feedback photo. And again, I'll get an impression right away. And I do this at the end. So I wait and I do the other techniques first. And this is all, I look at it at this as what have I missed? What do I really need to get if I didn't get it? The cool thing that happens is sometimes I will get something that I already got earlier in the session. And that's why personally sometimes I like to stay in a session longer, 20 minutes, 40 minutes. I mean, I've personally done ARV sessions that took over an hour. That's a little bit of overkill. And again, if you don't know what the photo is and you already described it well, the downside to that is sometimes your mind gets bored and starts describing other things because you already nailed it, in the first 2 minutes. But I have found that using this say 20 minutes into it, and then if I get something that repeated earlier, that's when you know if something repeats 2 times, 3 times, then you know that that information is most likely correct. And you know, I've heard experts say, well, remote viewers don't know if they're correct or not. That's really BS, because things repeat and things come in so strong sometimes that now this isn't true of every bit of information. I'd say overall maybe 80% of the time you won't, but there's going to be moments where if you've been doing this, you'd bet your life that there's at least something correct about what it is that you got, because it came, why should it keep coming up? The art of this comes in where you forget about what you saw. You saw it, you put it down. Once it's on the paper, let it go. You should not be trying to connect your impressions to the earlier impressions you got. So if you saw something round and something moving, put it on your paper, and that doesn't exist in your mind anymore unless you want to probe it. So that's where the paradox is. You're probing something, but you're not staying attached to what you thought it was. You're just like, oh, there's something interesting. I'm going to probe it. I'm going to get more information about it. Okay, so again, the final questions, sometimes I'll say what will be most easily recognized about the photo. So what's most, it's not necessarily the most compelling thing, but what is most easy for me to recognize about what's there? Or not me, but what information could I get that would allow the judge who's looking at my transcript make a decision? So then the information will come up that would be noticeable to that judge. For example, Henry had something in his session yesterday, a yellow square, and it was meaningful for him because it was in the picture. I was judging, and I had to judge looking at the photo inside the envelope, so our group didn't see it, and I totally missed that as a judge. So if he were to say, what would the judge most easily recognize, and he puts that into his session, then I may have, as a judge, have a much easier time with that. But again, these are only like icing on the cake to do at the very end of a session. And then what's the photographer noticing the most? Again, this can help or detract. Sometimes it really helps me, and occasionally it throws me off. And so we're just ending here. So everyone here can tune into photos or anything they want psychically. And I'm saying this isn't a big deal because I want you to tune into what you're supposed to tune into. So who here can tune into the right photo? And I know all of you can, so let's find out. Thank you. Okay.